Hello, nice people. This is Joe with Above the Tree Line, and today we're going to talk about shelf days. This is a measurement that a lot of the Edelweiss Analytics tools use to classify titles based on performance mostly, and also kind of like the health of a section, that sort of thing. So essentially, shelf days is an extremely simple calculation. It takes the number of copies on hand and it multiplies that by the days since the last activity. Activity meaning either received or sold. And in this case, we can see that the title in this example was received in April of 2018 and is one copy. So one copy times 663 days equals a score, essentially a shelf day score of 663. Essentially, that's letting you know that this copy has been sitting on the shelf probably for long enough. It kind of depends on how you view such things and how much leeway you give a title in your store. But by most measures, this title's had enough, basically. It is a system of scoring that, or measuring, I guess, that really weighs the number of copies on hand fairly heavily. In many senses that, if there's a stack of titles, then you invested more space and more money into that title, and so those definitely stand out a little bit. But in this case, so we have a single copy on the shelf for 20 days equals a shelf day score of 20, which is great. That's totally acceptable, of course. On the other hand, if you have 20 copies in stock for 20 days, then that's a shelf day score of 400. So really, if you have a stack of 20 titles, the idea behind that is that those titles are going to move pretty well, and you're not necessarily going to want to just stare at that stack of 20 books indefinitely. There's something that needs to change there, essentially, to get those sales moving. Now, the shelf days measurement is really based on the idea of a range. So you have, like 0 to 90 shelf days. That's, one title sitting on the shelf for 3 months. Most people would say that that's fully acceptable. Like, not everything is going to move every couple of weeks and stuff. That's kind of crazy. So the default for most of the tools in analytics is that anything is considered fresh if it has a shelf day score of 90 or below, and then stable is usually like 90 to 360 or so. And then, after 360, it would be considered stale. So that's essentially a year old, but, a rounder number. That is an adjustable thing. So on all the tools in analytics, you're going to see that little gear icon that you can see here with the arrow. And within that, you can set a different range for your shelf days if you like. So if you are way more strict and you're like, anything that hasn't moved in a month, I'm going to start slashing prices and all that. That's totally cool, and that's up to you. But you can set that shelf day score up to how you need it, and that will show how you set your shelf days dictates how things show up in the graphs, in the pie graphs. Here's an example of the pie graph, and it's also an example of how the shelf days measures the individual title performance. So you can see that this Maurice Sendak title has a shelf days of 175, which is okay. It's middling, not necessarily a title that's going to fly off the shelves all the time. But it also will help you measure overall performance. So, all the titles that are land within that like in stock stable range are showing in this one section of the pie. So you have essentially half of the store is doing okay. 40% in the green is doing great. It's moving pretty quickly. And a pretty slim 10% in this store are considered stale. That's an unusually low number. Probably if you look at yours, that number is going to be higher. most, just from what I've seen, clicking around a lot, getting a lot of averages and stuff like that. And the average seems to be about 20 or 25%, which is kind of high in my estimation. Like that's a quarter of your store hasn't sold in a year is kind of what that means. Conversely, we're also talking about stacks of titles. That's, if you have a stack of 10 books that hasn't sold in 2 months, then that's going to show up in the stale as well. And again, that's really stressing, those stacks of titles need to move a little quicker than just single copies. Here's another store. If you look at the pie graph on the left-hand side there, you'll see the stock analysis showing about 60% of the store is stale, which is not great. I think everybody would agree that the store may be in trouble. It's arguably speaking, like their issue here is not that they don't have everything on hand that their customers are looking for. It's that they have just too many books on the shelves that their customers don't want. And to me, that's what that stale number represents, or the stale designation is just that, maybe the best book in the store, maybe like, Nobel Prize winning author, everybody loves them, but nobody's buying that book. It could be because of the way it's displayed or not displayed, or it could be any number of factors. But this is your customer saying, no thanks. So definitely take that into consideration. And this is essentially something that you decide as a store, how you want your shelves to be represented. If you have a huge long backlist that nobody cares about, but that makes you feel good, that's not nothing. It's not necessarily a great way to run a business. But again, to each their own. I have obvious feelings about that. But so this slide is just showing using the shelf days to create a quick returns report. And it's probably one of the easiest ways to use it. You go to your stock analysis, click into the stale slice of pie there. Hopefully it's not quite that big. And then you just go down into the list of titles and select all and export those to one of the analytics formats. There's a whole webinar on how to do returns in Edelweiss Analytics that you should definitely check out. But just understand that it's the shelf days. It's a really simple concept. It's literally the number of days on the shelf that a title has, and it could be, again, if it's one title sitting on the shelf for 10 days, that's a shelf days score of 10. If it's 300 copies sitting on the shelf for 10 days, it's a lot. That's a score of 300. So really simple. One is obviously more worthy of attention than the other, is kind of what it comes down to. It's a great way for you to prioritize work in your store and also see what's doing well, what's doing great, even just keeps moving, and this constantly has a shelf day score of 2 or 4 or 5. Like, that's fantastic. Like those are books to applaud in a way that they're keeping your doors open. And that's it for today. Really super simple concepts, shelf days. And if you have any questions, of course, you can email us at support@abovethetreeline.com and we'll help you out. Great, thank you.